is the Ignoramus' Guide to Surviving Humanity. I'm Ileana Chan with my co-host. Should we just wait for Max and do that again?
No, I think that's great. And we have our guests this week.
We have two really special guests, actually. Go ahead.
Plural. Yeah. Great. Empowerment coach and actor Scott Victor Nelson and Anonymous Max.
Anonymous, but also world-renowned heartthrob Max. Who so do you want to do your own intro, Max?
This will be edited.
I'm Max.
Great.
He's Max. Okay.
And Ileana, what is this week's book?
So this month's book is Body Keeps the Score. And why we chose this book is because it's one of those books that basically is mentioned in almost every, like anything to do with self-improvement, therapy, even acting. I mean, this is the book, like the foundational book on trauma. And since I hadn't read it, I was like, I should probably read what everybody keeps talking about. And hence the book, yeah. And why we have Scott and Max on is because apparently they've learned a lot from this book. And it's a meaningful book to them.
I totally did not understand the prompt. Were we supposed to read the book before we talked?
Great. So like the prompt being, so the request for the podcast being, do you want to come on this podcast and discuss this book? And you were like, I have to read the book. Well, lucky for you, Scott knows this book so well that.
And I've also heard you talk about it, Max, so we're good. Just make it up.
Right.
Yeah. So so Scott, since you're the expert on this book, apparently.
I'm curious, Ileana, what was it like for you to read it?
Okay, so what it was like for me to read it was interesting because, first of all, none of it is new because it's so foundational. Like it really covers almost all my ideas about trauma. It was like it talked about first of all, it talked about so many different ways to deal with trauma that I'd heard about in pieces, like EMDR and yoga and meditation and then it talked about PTSD. So that was what was really, it was like so comprehensive. So that was like interesting. And my other takeaway from it, which is one that I'm actually trying to figure out, is it's something that Anne said when we were reading it. She was like, it kind of makes me think that everybody has trauma. Mm. And that was actually interesting to me because reading it, I actually got the opposite. I got the opposite idea. It was like, no, this book sort of makes trauma very, very real, very tangible. And I almost felt like when you say, oh, everybody's gone through trauma, you kind of gaslight everyone because the specific types of traumas, well, he talks about lots of different traumas, but a lot of that is just... I think he explains the mechanism of trauma really well in a way like that someone who hasn't been through intense trauma wouldn't understand. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I'm still trying to figure it out in my mind, so.
Well, you used an interesting term. You said by saying everyone's experienced trauma, you said you used gaslighting. What do you mean by that?
I kind of mean that, like, one of the things he does say in the book is that sort of like the root to the healing comes with the accurate understanding of the situation. So the accurate understanding of the trauma and what actually happened. So many people block out that trauma, and then it's still in, like, the body keeps the score. So it's still in your body and it determines how you react to different situations. So that's the thing that, it really establishes a tangible way in which it's not just like people are overreacting, you know what I mean? It's like, no, these people that he's talking about have had like real trauma that's created this reaction in their bodies. So if you kind of say, well, everyone's had trauma, someone who hasn't been through that type of intense experience wouldn't necessarily get triggered in these ways. And so they can kind of look at someone who is reacting in a way that seems crazy to them, as like.
I'm curious if it illuminated anything for you in your own life that maybe you weren't aware of before.
Not really for me, because one, like I said, like I think part of this book is that it is so comprehensive. So I've heard of a lot of these terms before. And the other thing that I was sort of like saying about this is that I haven't had these types of intense trauma. Like I've had like trauma maybe with small t, like, and I don't know if that sort of definition of trauma with a small t is helpful, because I still think that it overlaps, it makes it confusing in our minds, if that makes sense. But what about, so now that everyone knows exactly what I think about the book, what about you? When you first read the book, what were your takeaways? Because you both, Max included, read this book way before we did. And it came out in 2014. So what was your experience?
I think I gave Scott this book.
Oh, what?
Is this, I don't know. We had a whole thing where we were reading, like I'd be reading a book and I'd talk to you and then you were reading the same book. And we had a whole weird like go of that. So, but maybe you gave me this one.
I think this is one of the ones where like, how do I keep this in a general way? I had just been through a gnarly event in my life that was incredibly painful. And what had happened was that I needed to get some help, and it felt like my skin was on fire. And I kept telling the people who were helping me that my skin was on fire. And they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, I don't know how to put this any other way. It feels like my skin is literally on fire. And finally, someone said, I think you should read this book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I remember reading it, and the first couple chapters really talk about this guy, Bessel Kolk. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Working in, I believe it was Mass General, or maybe it was Harvard, but he was working with Vietnam vets and noticing these patterns of inclusion versus exclusion. Like they really didn't feel understood until they gave him badges and medals and made him part of their tribe. And I was like, okay, I relate in a number of ways, but I don't understand what this particular thing has to do with me. And I kept reading through it, and it was really kind of chronicling his history of understanding trauma before he even knew what he was looking at. And I remember there was a chapter, I think it was chapter 3, that was a big turning point, where he had something like 30 to 50 patients who were all women in their 30s. They had all been molested by their fathers, incest, and they were all going blind. And that's kind of when this light bulb went off, and I was like, oh shit. And I knew that whatever followed that was going to start, it was going to point to what was going on in my body that I couldn't figure out. And it was really important for me, I'll say this in a general way. I've been in the recovery community for about 12 years to start to understand what mechanisms, how the brain works, how the brain actually works, how trauma, what trauma really is. You hear these buzzwords used all the time: trauma, empathy, blah. I'll be honest, narcissism. I don't think people know what words they're actually using. I think it can be a big problem, because I kind of heard you say, I've been, traumatized, or you didn't say that, but you were saying you hear that. And then it's like, well, is that really trauma? What is trauma? So to have someone show you brain scans, I mean, that's where this book really started to be very helpful and show how the brain works, that there's this kind of frontal lobe that's where my human intelligence is based. And then I have this kind of emotional center in the back, and that's kind of this emotional intelligence. But then I have this core part of my brain in the brainstem called the amygdala. And it's my primal kind of lizard brain, my survival brain. And that essentially my amygdala, when I experience a situation where I'm fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that's a signal that my brain's sending into my body to give me the energy to take care of myself and survive. But human beings are different than other animals. Other animals, you see them fight. You'll see like two deer. I love going out in nature, and you'll see animals fight each other to, win the doe or whatever. And they'll fight, and then they'll shake it off afterwards. But as human beings, because of the way our brain is organized with the frontal lobe, this emotional center, we'll fire a signal from our amygdala in our body to fucking run, fight, do whatever we need to do. And it doesn't actually get translated. It doesn't happen. So the way it was described to me was energy and motion. The energy goes into the body, but the motion doesn't happen. So then my body has to adapt to the fact that it has this new energy inside of it. And it's this emotional block. So as I was reading this book, the more I read this book, the more I started to be aware of what was going on in my body. And I started to become very aware as I slowed down, as I had to practice meditation, again, had to get a lot of outside help. I started to feel very painful parts of my body that had always been there that I wasn't cognitively aware of. And by learning from this book that what was important was to feel safe, that the sense of safety enabled me to get in touch with these parts of myself that were unsafe feelings. Man, the title is beautiful because those parts of our body, if you get in touch with them, they have messaging inside of them. They tell you what needed to happen and didn't happen. And you can really get a sense of what needs weren't met, or what you needed to do in a particular moment. If we're talking about a capital T traumatic event, what feelings needed to come out. The body will talk to you. Like, this book changed my understanding. And I know I'm on a little bit of a rant here. This book changed my understanding of this term we use, mental illness, because it's really not, that's like outdated. I'm not qualified to say this, but this stuff isn't just happening from the neck up. It's not mental illness. It's a holistic thing. It's one system. The mental illness is the fact that it's cut off at the head. That's why we have mental illness, is because we're not looking at the body. We're not looking how it's all related, that this is just one system. So this book was revolutionary and really changed the way I looked at how to heal and how to recover. And again, like, I remember calling Scott and being like, have you read this book, man? And he was like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. He's like, you need to read this book. And then he called me a week later and was like, oh my God, this book changed everything. So that's my introduction. That's how I'm going to throw it to you, Scott.
I mean, yeah, I had been in therapy since my mid-20s, and I don't think I knew or had access to what was really going on, because if you're well, first of all, I was still drinking at the time. And I think that, doing anything, and he talks about it in the book, he talks about how, before I go there, I want to speak, Max, I love everything you said, and you brought up the amygdala. And the thing that I want to bring up about the amygdala before we move on is that if you were a small child and you grew up in a chaotic environment, and you grew up with parents who weren't able to feel their own feelings, or weren't able to treat you like a little human being that had its own thoughts and feelings, you grow up in a chaotic environment, what happens is that your amygdala is actually on overdrive from an early age. So instead of just having a normal response to a situation, your amygdala is already so overstimulated that the tiniest little thing sets you off. So I was in therapy since my mid-20s. Yes, it helped to talk about things. I quit drinking in my mid-30s, back into therapy, 5 years into therapy, my therapist tells me I have PTSD. I'm like, what? I grew up in Cleveland. I had a middle-class life. I had 2 parents and a dog and a sister. And like, what are you talking about? I have PTSD. Because I had this idea in my head that PTSD meant you came from the war, or PTSD meant that you went through something that was like someone beat the crap out of you when you were a kid, or you were molested as a child. And that didn't happen to me. What happened was a tremendous amount of emotional abuse. That's just the word that I'll use now. I wasn't comfortable with it before, but it was. There was a lot of love in my home. There was also a tremendous amount of neglect, and there was also a tremendous amount of caustic emotional abuse, a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, that kind of thing. So as a child, what I didn't realize is all of that energy goes into the little person's body, right? So if my mother screams for 3 hours a couple of times a week at me, that energy goes into my body. Now, as I grow up, what happens is I start going, oh, okay, I found my sense of humor. I joked about it. I had no idea the level of what actually was going on because I learned how to make light of it. And I learned how to make it funny. And I also learned how to be a really good drinker and a really good pot smoker and use other people to like not feel my feelings. So 5 years after quitting drinking, getting diagnosed with PTSD and starting to look at all these things, I realized that my whole life, I was living in a state of reaction because I never actually had a feeling of feeling safe to be able to make choices about what's happening. I was living like, what do I need to do to feel safe? So when I walk into a room, I'm hyper vigilant. I know who I need to avoid. Everything. There's so much hypervigilance. And we talk about empathy and we talk about empaths. And thank God the conversation is starting to change around that, because it's not a good thing when people are empathic. The reason people become empathic is because they grew up with such intense circumstances that they've had to learn how to know what other people are feeling to protect themselves and feel safe. So 5 years in, I get diagnosed with PTSD. I start looking at all this stuff and I realize all this stuff that I was unwilling to feel, that screaming that went into my body several times a week for years. Talk about the pain. I mean, Max, you and I have had conversations about this. The pain in my body was so intense. And I realized sometimes that when I sat with the pain and I really sat with it, it literally felt like the sound of my mother yelling. And I was like, this is crazy. Like the body keeps the score. Like you can't just treat the mind. You can't. And the only way of going through it is to actually allow the body its experience of feeling and creating a place where you are actually safe enough to feel. I didn't have a space to be safe enough to feel until I was several years off drinking, back in therapy, doing all this stuff, because the mind is trying to protect the body from feeling all of those things, right? It literally is there to protect. So it thinks it's doing a good job, but the problem is it's actually protecting you from living and having a life. And the only way of doing that is to allow the feelings to come up, which is fucking like dying. It is in some ways, because you die to the old way of coping. You die to thinking that a drink, a drug, a person, shopping, whatever is going to be, is gonna fix you. You have to let go of all of the mental constructs and just be with the feelings of the body. So when I read this book, I was so blown away. I could only listen to it in small chunks because it was speaking to my body.
Scott said that thing about empathy, and that made me also curious, because, and also this is a good point.
I actually didn't say anything about empathy. I talked about empaths, which is different. I think empathy is all of us need to practice empathy, right? Okay, practicing empathy and being able to imagine what it's like to be in another person's shoes is exactly the thing that starts to free us. But then we have to be able to be in that discomfort, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm talking about being an empath, which is the people who are hypervigilant and can feel other people's feelings, not just their own. And the reason that I'm talking about that is because there's been conversations recently around empaths. People always thought empaths were like special human beings, right? But empaths are actually created from traumatic events. They're people who had to learn how to feel other people's feelings because those people couldn't feel them and they weren't able to feel their own. And so it's actually not a healthy thing. That's different than empathy. Being able to empathize with another person is an incredibly important and healthy and necessary skill. Little different. So I just wanted to clear that up.
That's good. I'm really glad you cleared that up because I did not understand that. But this is a really good point to turn to Anne, who once told me that she was an empath. So what do you think about that?
What do I think about
Do you
being an
relate to
empath?
that? Yeah, do you relate to that, the idea that you are an empath, or is that a
Yeah,
misuse of the term? Or yeah.
no, totally. Because it, it's always been much easier for me to take on other people's feelings and to feel that because I disassociate. That's the correct word, right? Disassociate. That's what they're saying. And that's what like reading the book / listening to the book because I didn't read it. That that's where I was like, oh, well, I don't know that I know everything that has happened to me had happened as a kid. Like there are definitely some things that I think I've blocked out in order to cope, in order to protect myself, because listening to it, I was like, oh, that's familiar. Oh, that's familiar. Like, I don't know how to be in my body. Like when I met Scott, he always was like, there's just something frozen in you, like, and it's slowly unthawing. But that's me like disassociating. There's so many events in my life where I either didn't know what happened and it would like, I always felt like it was an alien experience. Like then I would come into my body. Or there are times that I know like I would take myself out of the situation and able to be able to cope. And so that made me start thinking and having a lot more compassion for other people, because how many other people don't know things that have happened and who have blocked that out?
So is it like, because he actually mentions that in the book, that the alien experience, he talks about that, like he talks about a few incidences where they would black out, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I definitely.
but things would happen.
Yeah.
To you, I mean, like other people would be like, "You said that." And was it
Yeah.
like that?
So I have. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like there was one I remember, like I had knocked on somebody's door and tried to open it, like somebody's front door. I don't remember any of this at all. And then I just like when I like was into the body, somebody, I think it was like my sister's friend's house. Somebody opened the door and was like, "Why are you trying to get in? Like I heard you do ring the doorbell." Like they're just random little things that I don't know. It's interesting.
So have you ever done EMDR?
I have not.
I have.
Do you think this is really interesting, and you as well? Do you think this is something that would help Anne? Sorry. No.
Ileana was looking out for me.
Well, it was just like what you talked about. I was like, this is sort of the beginning. If Max and Scott had this sort of revelation from this book, this is like the beginning of your huge journey. Do you feel that reading the book?
Well, I don't think it's the beginning, because it's like,
I mean, yeah, no.
look, I remember being in therapy and trying to excuse, like, I was like, yes, so this trauma event happened, but it's nothing compared to like this is what people are living through every day. And it was something my therapist had to be like, okay, but can we just take a moment and say like that impacted you and that was not okay? And we had to go through and like have that acceptance, and he like held space and made me like sit in it for a bit. And it's like, because I've been taught to, well, it's not as bad as somebody else. I don't have it as bad as that. And so I don't feel like I'm allowed to have any of that feelings. And then it's like Scott has also met my grandmother, where like my whole dad's side of the family, like they're not in touch with feelings. They're not in touch with any of that. And that's like, I wonder now how much of the intergenerational things, that they're that trauma that's just been passed through that nobody's dealt with.
The way the story, it was told to me in a very simple way, which is there's a fish and he's just swimming around and he's doing his thing. And all of a sudden this bigger fish, this older fish comes by and goes, well, the water's kind of cold today, huh, buddy? And then swims by. And the little fish keeps going. And then it's like, wait,
what's water?
What the fuck's water? I'm so conditioned to, as Scott said, abuse, whether it's from family of origin, cultural messaging, whatever, that I'm just like, this is normal. This is normal. Everything's normal here. I mean, we live in a culture that straight up says, like, unless you get a graduate degree education and make a shitload of money, you failed. There's no inherent self-worth in that. You're telling me that doesn't have an effect on you? No, it's what makes my brain fucking run all day sometimes. It's like, well, I need to pay for this and get this. And then maybe if I do this, then I'll be happy. And then I'll blah, blah, blah. Then I'll be enough. Da, 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 da. All that fucking spinning about maybe if I get this, then I will feel complete. I will feel whole. When I'm not even here, man. That's trauma. Half the people on this planet aren't even fucking here right now. That's why this shit keeps happening, because they're not here.
I've been reading statistics about, I guess, men's mental health in the US and how they're the least likely, I guess, demographic to ask for help. Like, did you feel, so how do you sort of battle with that?
It took me forever to ask for help because I was taught as a man, like, Max, you did a great job of talking about like, if you're like not allowed to feel sad, right? But it's like, I was told to be grateful. If I was never allowed to be angry. I really wasn't allowed to be sad, right? So I was told if I had feelings, I was dramatic or oversensitive. So what I did is I pushed them down. And as men, we're taught that. As men, we're not taught feel your feelings. As men, we're not taught your feelings are valid or they matter. And we're taught, hey, just toughen up, right? Rub, like if you get hurt, like, get back in the game, blah, blah, blah. But like, there's feelings there. We're feeling human beings. And to be able to do that requires so much strength. And I could never have done it without asking for help. But for me to get to a place of asking for help, I was so fucking broken. I was so fucking done. I literally at one point was basically collapsed with 6 men holding me up because I couldn't fucking do it anymore. And I'm hoping that by having conversations like this, other men hear this and they know they're not fucking alone. And they know that it actually takes more strength to ask for help. And there's people like Max and I out there that are actually there waiting for them to ask for help. That's why I became a coach, because I want to fucking be able to support people through this. Because it literally is the ability to get your life back rather than live what looks like a life to the outside, but inside you're fucking dying. Who wants to live like that?
I mean, look, I wish comfort is a soul-killing enterprise. It is. I wish someone had taught me it is okay to be uncomfortable. And the thing is, like, that means for that to work, all of us have to accept discomfort. And the reason it's not even discomfort, it's fucking life happening in real time. But we're so unaccustomed to it that it comes up and we call it anxiety. And then we have to treat the anxiety and make it go away. And that's literally killing the planet. We are killing life as it's happening. And we're taught that over and over again. And particularly as men, when it comes to emotions, like, oh, fuck, man. these emotions that I have are natural responses. They are natural responses, some of it to a lot of it to my perception, but also to just what's happening. I would say our perception collectively is so distorted at this point because of so much unlived life. I'm going way off track here. I don't even know if we're talking about body keeps the score. But what needs to happen, and what Scott was great at, like showed me so much, is just allowing discomfort. That's how trauma gets healed, because it's so freaking painful. So EMDR, here's the ignoramus's understanding of this ignoramus's understanding of EMDR. Going back to the brain and why this book is so helpful. We can go off of, and who knows if this is true, but you hear it all the time, so it's helpful for this conversation. Left hemisphere, right hemisphere. And then you have this thing connecting it, and you have your amygdala, right? So trauma's firing from here into my body. I get loaded with this thing. And then I have my left hemisphere and my right hemisphere. My right hemisphere is this emotional thing going, what's going on? And my left hemisphere is going, that's this is what that is. Let's name it. Ooh, you're sad. This is if maybe this is because. So I have these three things just all kind of like trying to make sense of life. And trauma rewires the brain so that this thing is like, I think about it, I get traumatized. It's why he talks about talk therapy quite a bit in this book, how talk therapy is great, helped me a lot. But sometimes talking about something will re-traumatize me. And unless I have a modality to help me get back into my body, I will just continue to go further in my head to avoid the pain in my body. This drug. It's fucking amazing. This is an internal pharmacy. This bad boy right here can, at will, call in drugs, call in epinephrine, call in dopamine, call in serotonin, just by how I think about things. And the truth is like, until I really look at this stuff, this stuff is actually kind of running this instead of this running this, or working together. So what EMDR does, and you can do it on Zoom. I've done it on Zoom.
Really?
Fucking crazy. Excuse my French. Is it's kind of like that. When the first time you do it, it's kind of like hypnosis, but it's not really hypnosis. What it's doing is it's eye movement desensitization. What's the last one, Scott? R is, it's not reinforcement. What is it?
Eye movement.
Like reprocessing something. Again, I'm an actor, guys. Like, I don't know why the fuck anyone's listening to me talk about this, but that's not true. Actors are cool. EMDR.
Because you're a human being who's actually gone through this experience, Max.
You just outed yourself, Max.
Yeah, I know.
So what would a session be like? Like just
Well, I don't know.
So,
They're all
I
But
mean, go ahead.
hey, I was getting to the good part.
Sorry.
By following this, or you might have paddles in your hand that stimulate, what it's doing is it's oscillating back and forth between your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. And it's creating a bridge between your thinking brain, which might be going, and your emotional brain, which might be going, and it allows them to communicate in order to calm down so that you can get
In your body.
So that's why it's helpful, is because, again, it allows you to go back in your body. And the way that denial works, first and foremost, kind of like we were talking about, again, I'm not a therapist, so take what I say with a grain of salt. The way
Even
denial
if you were a
works,
therapist, I would still take everything you say with a grain of salt.
thanks, Ileana. So sometimes Scott used to ask a very simple question. He'd be like, how are you feeling today? And I'd be like, well, I feel like my blah, blah, blah is blah, blah, blah. And if I just had blah, 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 then I would be blah, blah, blah. And Scott would look at me and he'd be quiet. And then he'd say, do you want some feedback? And I'd be like, sure. And he'd say, you didn't answer my question. How are you feeling today? Well, I feel like if da-da-da and da-da-da, and I'm really blah, blah, blah about blah, blah, blah. And you'd be like, cool. Let's try something else. Take a deep breath. What's going on in your body? All of a sudden I'd be like, oh shit, my shoulder's up. My chest is burning. And he'd be like, tell me what sensations are going on in your body. And I'd be like, my chest is burning, my shoulders up. And I'd be like, oh, this is actually feeling. The other stuff was thinking. And then Scott might ask me a question like, what do you think your shoulder would say when it's up like that? What do you think it would say if it had a voice? And I'd be like, well, that's a fucking stupid question. I don't know. First thing that comes to your mind. It's okay. It'd say it's okay. And then I might get a response like, oh, maybe that's the only shoulder you could cry on. Your own. For a long time. Huge emotional tears.
Yeah.
Point being, like, I can't tell you how many guys, particularly when I meet guys like first starting to work on themselves or like having worked on themselves for a while, where you ask the very simple question, how are you feeling? And you don't actually get an answer to that question. I didn't even know that. You're getting how someone's thinking about how they're feeling. And if you again kind of extrapolate or expand on that, most of my life isn't life well lived. It's me thinking about what a life well lived would look like, or me thinking about I'm literally living life through a fucking straw of my thoughts, going, "This is great! Oh yeah!" That is a trauma response.
That's super well said, dude. My EMDR experience was a little different. So to build on what he said, yeah, they'll either do a finger following back and forth, or pads where there's sound, or there was one other thing and I can't remember what it was, but we started with that other thing because my therapist was terrifying. So I did trauma therapy with a therapist that I was terrified of, which I don't recommend anyone doing. I also don't recommend trying to date.
Safe.
What? I also don't recommend trying to date in the middle of trauma therapy because it will not go well. Just don't try to date anyone in the middle of trauma therapy. But okay, so EMDR. So I had a therapist at the time. So one of my big things that we were talking about earlier is I was never allowed to be angry, right? So I had a lot of anger. And I'd be with this therapist and I'd tell her I was angry, or I was really angry. I was so angry. And she would say to me things like, well, maybe we shouldn't work together anymore. Like, she couldn't hold the space for my anger. And that re-triggered the mom stuff and the abandonment stuff. So I'm doing EMDR with someone that I don't even feel like I can be fully there with, right? But so what you do is you go back to a specific memory. Like for me, it would be going back to the kitchen and my mother screaming. And you go back to that memory and you imagine that memory while either the fingers going back and forth, or you're holding the sensors that are creating, or there's sound sometimes, but it moves back and forth, left to right, left to right, left to right. And as that happens, it puts your brain in a different place, right? In that memory, in that experience, because all trauma has to be healed by exposure. I don't know any other way other than, I guess, some of the brain stuff they're doing. You have to be willing to relive whatever that thing is to reprocess it differently, which is what EMDR does. And then when you finish doing that, you go back to a very grounded, you imagine a place that feels very comfortable, very safe, right? But I could never get there with her because she was there. So for my EMDR experience was one of the worst times of my life, because I left the session still traumatized, and then would go to this person I was dating. And didn't tell the person that I was doing trauma therapy because I had shame around it. And it was just this horrible fucking experience. Luckily, it lasted about 10 sessions and then ended. But the process of doing it, the process of going back to that memory, and you can even do your own sort of version of it. Like anyone that's listening that's had an experience, just go into your memory of the really traumatic event that happened. Imagine it, see yourself there, right? Then you, as the adult version, just go back and take your kid's hand. I did that with someone one time, and it was so life-changing, because when I was a little kid getting yelled at, I didn't have a body. I was just a brain trying to understand why someone was yelling at me. I had no idea that I was a person standing there, that I could move, that I could leave, that I could do anything, right? So imagining going back there and taking that little boy's hand all of a sudden gave that little boy a body. And that was a very, it just changed something for me. It was really powerful because also then you see the situation differently. You're in this, instead of just being the little kid in the situation, there's the bigger version of you walking around it, right? Like I can go behind my mother in this version. I can go stand and I can go do other things that I couldn't do. And I don't know, for me, it was super powerful.
This is making me, I think this is a very ignoramus moment, but I was very curious about MDMA therapy. Have you guys heard about that? And this is kind of making me understand why that might work.
Yeah,
Because it would reroute your brain. Have you actually done that? I mean, you probably don't
so
want me
there's
to say that.
there's a lot. I'll say this in a general way. There's a lot in the back of that book. And it's why I love that book. It's like it'd be one thing if it was just the first half of that book and be like, this is trauma. The end.
Yeah.
Like, oh shit. But the back half is all solution oriented. Half of the book is solutions. It's like, okay, well, you can heal this stuff. There's a lot of hope. I can't, I think it would be ridiculous to think that I could heal it myself. I mean, one way it was described to me is I need to live into a new paradigm, and anything I think or feel is currently in this paradigm. So I'm going to need help. I'm going to need someone, I heard it described as like, when you go to a zoo or a circus and you see a sphere of death, those motorcyclists who go around and around and around in that like little metal sphere, and they just pull on the gas and then they go even faster around. That's kind of me without a solution, without outside help. Is like, I'm just going to do this better. And I gun it and I just go around and around again. And what I really need to do is I need to like slow down, have someone outside the cage help me. I stop the bike, I get off. I still got my sea legs because I've been going around for 33 years. I'm nauseous. I'm in pain. I'm like, and someone's outside going, yeah, just crawl this way a little bit. I still feel like I'm going around the thing. I'm like, I'm spinning. And then they open the cage and I can slowly walk out. And there are a number of ways where not only is it like getting out of the cage, but then like, oh, I'm not living on a bike anymore. Like, welcome to the circus. Still fucked. What do I do? But so it's like the back half of that book is like, there's also body trauma release therapy, which is something I've done, which is amazing, which is instead of talk therapy, it's working from the body up. So
Yeah,
it's like
all this somatic healing.
Somatic healing, somatic experiencing, scanning, meditation is really important. There's all different kinds of meditation. For me, I can say, I don't know what they're called because it doesn't fucking matter, but I do like body scans where I'll just check in. Headspace was super helpful and just feel what's going on in my body really slowly. Nature, animals. I go hang out with wild mustangs and deer and I feed them apples and then I'll cry. Don't know why. It works. It's great. Drum circles, acting, community theater. I mean,
oh yeah,
Yeah,
like
the
so
theater
talk
stuff he
about
talked
how,
about
yeah, that
was
was interesting. Talk a little bit more about that and like whether or not it changed you as an actor, um, with
uh,
this knowledge of trauma, reading
no
this
doubt.
book.
No doubt. I mean, it changed everything. Changed that. It fundamentally flipped my understanding of the world. This book did.
So
That's how
what is the
important.
thing? What is the thing about act? Because he talks about it in the book about how theater can also really help with trauma. And can you explain a little bit about that? Like, how does
Well,
it do that?
okay, so I'm going to give you my
You're an actor.
I can speak to the acting part. First of all, if you're approaching, this is my opinion, you can do it however you like. I don't really worry about how other people do shit these days. There's exceptions to that all the time, but in general, that's something. Um, I think for me, if I'm approaching something as he or it's happening to him, what I'm doing is I'm pushing away an experience. I'm not allowing, it's not happening to me. I'm not owning an experience. So right then and there, like that's starting point, it's happening to me or it's happening to a part of me, a part. Um, but it's not like this character and I think this character is like this and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't intellectualize it. For me, I would absorb the circumstances as kind of dictated by the writing, and the circumstances point to an experience which beyond the experience an experience is delivered through the language, because it's not only what happened, it's a perception of what happened. So I try and live in that. And what it does, ideally, if I slow down enough and I make it specific enough through my senses, imagined or not, because the brain doesn't know the difference, is I start to have a somatic experience. And the cool thing about theater, and this is why I find it to be so helpful, is that, again, going back to that conversation we had about denial, if I have certain blockages psychologically from getting into parts of my body, like literally like little defense towers that are just like, if he gets close, fire this thought and he'll go back that way. Like I can't even get in the zone. But what theater can do is I can take someone else's story, and it's almost like Inception, where it gets around the defense, because I'm still like, I'm using this specific story and I'm living this story somatically and it's real to me and I'm empathizing. That's the real definition of the word empathizing. I'm having the experience, not, oh man, I feel bad for that guy who's having the experience. That's not empathy. I'm having the experience, and all of a sudden it's gone around my own defenses and I'm accessing a part of my body that psychologically my brain is like, doesn't know that I'm still entering a part of my soul that's been blocked. So it's soul work. This stuff's all soul work, or magic with a K, or if you're super, brainy and you can't handle those words.
It's embodiment. It's embodiment work. It's all about getting into the body.
That's really great.
How was that? Yeah. Was that an explanation for you?
I think that was a brilliant explanation about acting, because it really also, all the stuff that we talked about before, where it's like the denial, the comparison, like I shouldn't, this, that, all that goes away in acting, right? Because you're telling someone else's story, but then it becomes yours, and all your own chatter is just gone. So I think, to me, would be the most effective. No, obviously don't know that, but like, well, I think, really an effective tool.
I think the idea is, and I mean, I'll go back to the book, and what he's talking about is like a kid who doesn't have access to being able to express himself, or is feeling really shut down, and the communal nature. See, one of the things that I think we're very lacking in as a society, and what we really need to shift things is we need more communities. We need more like village mentality, right? We need more of like groups and support and people doing things together. And like, that's one of the things that theater offers, is this communal thing. So if you're a shy kid, or you can't feel your feelings at home, or you can't do whatever, all of a sudden you go and you get to play. I love what he talked about bringing Shakespeare into the inmates in prison, and being like, at first they were like, what the fuck am I going to do with Shakespeare? And then you start getting into it and you realize all these deep universal themes around, love and betrayal and murder and desire. And all of a sudden these prisoners are invested because they realize it's all the human story, right? And so I think that's what theater allows. It allows a safe space where you're expressing. However, my experience was, even though I had the access to the ability to do that on stage, I couldn't do that in my own life. And that eventually took a toll on me. So I had to be able to do that, because also getting on stage, this is one thing as an actor that I think is an interesting thing. Getting on stage as a way of being able to be someone you can't be in your own life may mean that I'm not actually being a full human being on stage. Like sometimes I know for me, I would use acting as, well, now this is a place that I can feel safe. But the world isn't necessarily safe. So what would it be like to actually get on stage and let people know what it is to actually feel unsafe and be there, right? Like, I've been working a lot on Shakespeare recently. I've been working a lot on Hamlet. And I'm studying with this teacher that was part of the Royal Shakespeare Company. And one of the things he says that I remember talking about this years ago as an actor and being told, no, you can't do that. Like, some situations you don't want to be in, right? Everyone's always looking for the positive of, why are you in there? What do you want? What is the thing, right? Some situations in life, you're like, I don't want to fucking be here. I don't know, right? Like, that's life. Like, we're just trying to get through the moment. And this teacher of Shakespeare, his name's Rob Clare, he's phenomenal, talks about that. He's like, everyone's so like, this girl was working on Juliet, and she's like, I feel like I just want to express all these things to Romeo. He's like, that's great, but what if you actually don't want to say these things and they come out? What if you actually don't want to be in this moment and you're just trying to get through it and because that's life. And I think that sometimes is missing in theater and art, is that deeply human part of, fuck, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think this really makes me think of Anne, like, because you did so much musical theater. And so you talked about how it's like almost like a box type of thing, when even though you're so good at it, that it doesn't have the same amount of release, that, I don't know, maybe you can speak to your experience better than I can.
Mm, wait, what do you mean? But like, it doesn't have as much
Well, I think it
release?
was like what Scott, when Scott, you were saying that before, when you could feel safe on stage, but you weren't doing that in real life. Like I mean, you were using the stage as a place to feel safe, but you weren't, and you could express yourself, but you weren't fully able to express yourself in real life. Was that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And it just made me think of Anne talking to me about musical theater and how.
Um, well, I think it may have been more specifically in like jukebox musicals where it's just fluff and people don't actually want to feel anything. And that's a lot that I have problem with musical theater, where like things that are coming out now are a little bit darker, and they deal with trauma. They deal with things that people don't want to talk about. And so many of the older generation, um, they just are, they have a distaste for it because they want to go there and just be happy, and they don't want to think, and they don't want to sit like within that stuff. It's the same thing that Max was saying before. Like, people just don't want to sit in it. They can't just be there and feel those things. And you're having that empathic experience living through the story that you're seeing. And so people just want to have all of the happiness and not like, oh, this person's being raped, this person's being murdered, this person is, like all of these feelings are happening. They just want to like, oh, this is fun. Let's sing along with this song. That doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
go for it.
no, but you're right, and all the musicals that have come out recently, like, I mean, I remember seeing Next to Normal and just being blown away, because here's this musical about mental health, right? All of a sudden you're seeing this musical about a woman struggling with her mental health and how it affects the family. And it's like, yeah, that shit wasn't going on when I was a kid, right? That wasn't happening. So I didn't, and so I would imagine on some level how healing that is for an audience member who's growing up in a family where that kind of shit's going on, to see that on stage, because that's also the power of theater, is the ability to reflect back. You put a bunch of people in a room together and they're all watching theater, and they've done studies, their heartbeats link up. There's a coherence that happens with the audience, that their heartbeats link up. So if you think about that, I would imagine on that same level, if people are traumatized and things like that, like it's a collective experience, right? So it's cool that these stories are starting to show up on stage now.
As
And
opposed to light from the piazza.
something came up, and I want to say something, which is like, I actually got this question last night when I was eating way too much Korean barbecue. Someone
Always a
said,
time
like,
for.
is this, I think we had mentioned that this was going to happen tomorrow, and which is today. And someone said, well, like, you've done a lot of this stuff. Like, do you think it has a benefit? And the reason I'm saying that is because I don't want anyone who's listening to think like, oh, I'm just going to focus on trauma and like, just be really dark and morbid all the time. Like, that is not the gift or the reward for doing this work. It is if you want. You can do whatever you want. But I think it's worth saying, what some of the rewards have been for me personally, having done some of this, having really used this book as a guide in a lot of ways. And then also why I really think what Anne said was very important. So maybe I'll start with that, which is like, I used to think that if I just focused on the good, and I'll call it toxic positivity, and manifested all these things, I could somehow skirt around these things that were already there. I mean, that's the thing about denial, is it's not like it's not there, and if I think about it, it will come into existence. Denial is, it's stuff that's already there. It's already part of my experience. I'm literally saying, you're not worth it to myself. You're not worth having your feelings about these things. You're not worth it. And the way that the story was delivered to me was, there's a guy, and this is a dark story, who's in this freaking, thrown in the bottom of a well. It's like this cave, and it's dark, and there's stones all over the floor, and at the top is this little light, and he knows if he just gets to the light, he'll live and he'll be happy. So he just starts piling up these stones. I'm just gonna be happy. I'm just gonna be happy. He starts getting all these rocks, and after about 14 days, he's like really freaking hungry, and he starts putting more. I'm just gonna be happy. They find his body 2 weeks later. He's at the top of this little pile. He's maybe like 5 stones short of getting through the thing. And they shine a flashlight down there, and they're like, oh, dude, what a bummer. If he had just crawled around on the floor in the darkness for a little bit, he would have found this little tunnel that just led out. And that's the problem with toxic positivity, is like, it's not going to work because it's not based in reality. You don't have enough stones to get up there, dude. It's not going to happen, bro. It's not going to happen. So it's like, really, like, this is kind of the way I see it. It's you could call it wise, we call it wisdom, but it's just like, the rest is an exercise in futility. Like, I have to treat this stuff, like, let's just assume I have it, and let's just start talking about it. And maybe it's a process. I can trust the process, and the rewards are, I can speak for myself. A, we're having this conversation. That's pretty freaking cool. B, that sense of community that Scott was talking about. I have a community. I feel more part of a community. I don't feel isolated. C, I enjoy my life. I don't spend as much time in the future thinking about what I need in order to be happy, or in resentment about the past. I don't know what letter I'm on anymore. But like, I think and I don't know if it's mentioned in this book, but I do believe that there is a fundamental joy to just being here. And it's very quiet. Mm-hmm. And the way trauma was, the way I describe it for me, is that trauma was like Metallica at level 7 at all times, but I'd heard it my whole life. So I was just kind of yelling over it, like, what's up, man? Because it was playing. And it meant that, like, whenever I got below level 7, I'd start to hear the Metallica and be like, oh, I need to go find something to get back above level 7 volume so I don't have to hear this music. I love Metallica, for the record. But let's go use substances. Let's go spend money frivolously. Let's, sex and love. Let's do these things, gambling. And I know those are all intense, but even a lot of thinking, whatever it is, adrenaline. Let's get these internal chemicals up above level 7 so I don't have to fucking hear Metallica as background music. So as a result, I wasn't here the whole time. I was this guy. There's nothing wrong with that guy. I love that guy. But as I work on trauma, the volume starts to go down, maybe level 3. And I start getting accustomed to, like, oh, okay. Oh, level 1. Oh, silence is really nice. Doing nothing is really nice. There's this phrase, don't just do something, sit there. And one thing, and a really helpful exercise for me is, Scott, you might have taught me this one, is I used to go out to dinner. I would go see friends, or I'd be in a kind of a group communal setting, and I would sit there and I put my hand, I keep my legs open, and you'll do this in EMDR if you do it. You uncross your legs, you uncross your arms, because that's kind of this hugging myself, caretaking, keeping it in, protecting myself. There's nothing wrong with that, but I got to know what this stuff is. I find the tension in my body. Ooh, I let that go. All of a sudden I'm open. And if I sit and I make a commitment to just allow whatever discomfort comes and to not move, oh man, you'll start to understand why you do half the crazy shit you do. you'll start to get it, because all of a sudden I'll feel this stuff moving through me and I'll be like, and really, I don't want to live my life like that. That's why this book's so important.
I want to be so present to life that I'm able to experience it all, because I know the other way. Going after getting, I had money, I had stuff, I had whatever, right? But it was all just about getting, and I wasn't really there for my life. I wasn't. And now, to talk about what I get to experience, yeah, I'm part of a community. I get to openly speak honestly about things that I never would have spoke about before, and I never would even listen to other people speak about. I no longer want to throw up and punch someone when someone says inner child, because I used to, and I realized that was because that was the relationship with that part of myself. I have really incredible relationships with friends where we're honest and we share openly, and there's support. I'm in the most loving, incredible relationship of my life. And I couldn't have done any of that before. I have a business where I support other people who want to do this work. And like, sometimes I'll be on a call with someone and they'll be like, why do you do this? Like, what do you get out of this? And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, we get to connect on a level that is so genuine and real. And it's amazing. And the fact that someone is willing to feel those feelings and they're willing to do it in front of me is like the greatest fucking gift in the world, because somebody did that for me. So
You can't figure this stuff out. It's my logical brain. One of the ineffective behaviors I developed from trauma was to try and intellectualize and understand myself. So I had this constant narrator, always, like, either it was a movie or a book or the critic or whatever, always trying to understand what was going on and like figure out how to make it better or modify the experience or what this person thought about it and how to change that or whatever. And it was really, I didn't realize it, but it was really painful because without intending to it, and I say this with a lot of compassion, I was self-centered and in isolation in my thinking. And I really didn't want that. I really wanted a sense of community and connection. And that's what I was trying to do through my thinking. I was trying to get that sense of connection. It's just, I can't do it. I can't ask this thing to do that for me. I can't ask this thing to do something it can't do. And the pain of living with trauma is expecting your brain to figure out life at all times. And your brain just can't do it. It's not your fault. No one's brain can do it. But it's the constant stress and shame of not being able to do it because you don't know any better. And what these modalities offer, and why I went off on a little tangent there, but is some of that clicking stuff on the laptop. You're like, how is this supposed to help? Or how's this is supposed to help? Or like yin yoga with my hips open, falling, and like I hear my pelvis cracking. How is this supposed to help? And it's just a different way. It's a different paradigm of getting into the body and slowly feeling myself more than just my thoughts. They call it the path out of the head and into the heart. And there's so many parts of my body that I'm just finally starting to be like, holy shit, that's what a leg is. I thought I had a leg the whole time. I haven't felt my leg. Like it's wild. This stuff is wild.
The one thing I'll say about trauma, I think people believe like, great, you do EMDR and it's healed. Trauma is something that you, big T, little t, sort of face or deal with every day in some way, right? And it's an ability to continue to walk forward and continue to just walk forward. We touched very lightly on, in the last few years, they've started to talk about complex PTSD versus PTSD. And I just want to explain the difference for people that are listening or watching. PTSD is one event, one horrible event, like you're in a war, something happens, there's a rape, it's PTSD, it's one event. The way to treat that is that people are trying to get more in the present. That's how I was trying to treat my PTSD, but unfortunately my PTSD was actually complex PTSD, which is that an event occurs several times in repetition. And so those people we people are hyper vigilant, and it's not about trying to get in the present. We're already in the fucking present, terrified. It's about creating a space of feeling safe. So complex PTSD, you need to create a space that feels safe. It's the only way that you're going to be able to heal, feel the feelings to heal, right? It's a simple thing, feel to heal, but it's so true. And this is a process. And if anyone's listening or watching, wherever you are in it, if you're actually looking at this stuff, you are so brave.
I'll say one thing which came up as you were speaking, Scott, which was I need a safe space. But because I have complex PTSD, because I have trauma, actually, paradoxically, when I'm around safe people, sometimes I actually feel unsafe because there's finally enough room to feel my discomfort. So I used to reject safety. There were certain healthy people in my life who would sit there and be calm, and I'd be like, fuck that guy. Because all of a sudden I felt seen, and I would project it back onto the person and be like, they're awful. So it's really like part of this is even learning and being willing to perhaps accept that I may not know what I need. That's why I might need professional help. That's why I might need someone to tell me, actually, this is safe and this isn't safe. This is a healthy behavior. This isn't, and not in a way where I'm giving someone authority necessarily. But one of the tragedies of this thing is like my version of safety had abuse in it.
Yeah.
So I was always looking for abuse.
Yeah.
But here's something else that's really helpful, particularly maybe for men, although I do think toxic masculinity affects women as well, and the patriarchy, that's across the board. That's my opinion. Come at me for it. I don't care. At Max Carver. But is David Goggins, who was a Navy SEAL, he wrote this book called You Can't Hurt Me. And this guy is the toughest fucking dude I remember listening to this while I was going through trauma therapy and like, why am I listening to this? Why am I listening to this? Why am I listening to this? This guy was talking about when I was in the Navy SEALs, I was in day 40 of boot camp, buds training in San Diego, and I broke my leg and I ran 50 miles on a broken leg. And they said to me, son, you have to leave. And I was like, I'm not leaving. But then my leg started to rot, so I had to leave. I came back 1 year later, same thing happened. I was like, oh my God, I am such a coward. And he said these stories over and over again. And then he said, after the third time,
Wow.
he said, the whole reason I had gone to the Navy SEALs was to prove how tough I was. And after I broke my leg for the third time, running 50 miles on day 50 of buds training, they said, sorry, you failed. We can't accept you. That was your last try. And he went home, and he had been chasing this dream of being a Navy SEAL and is the toughest man on earth. This guy runs 200 miles for fun in like over a 24-hour period. He gets home, and with this idea, this carrot that's been in front of him to kind of distract him, realizes that he's been running from childhood trauma. The thing that he had to prove he was tough over, he finally had to sit with it. And he said, I would rather go through buds training 3 more times than sit with that amount of pain that was in my body. There is nothing more terrifying than complex PTSD and PTSD. This is not based off of a military record. He's talking about child abuse and growing up in the family that he did. So I just say that, like, one thing that was so important is I have a tendency to minimize my experience. I minimized abuse. I minimized these things that happened to me, because if I were to say what really happened to me, I would be challenging everything I know. I would be challenging every authority figure in my life, starting with my family of origin and beyond. It would be like giving God the middle finger. And what I'm saying is, if that's what you need in order to claim yourself, in order to be here and feel whole and to feel inherently worthy of having life, throw that fucking middle finger up and do what you got to do and get the help you need and have the feelings you got to have. And if people can't deal with it, they're okay. All right. But maybe take some space from them for a little bit and go find the people who can hold space for you, because that's what I needed. And if I didn't get that stuff, I mean, I don't know what would happen. So this stuff is of critical importance.
That's beautiful. Do you guys have any resources for people that are just in the beginning of their journey?
there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, chances are, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it or whatever you're doing, you're already interested. Like, it took me years to find this stuff. If you're already here, like, you probably already have the fuel to go find this stuff. There are amazing books. There's a book called Drama of the Gifted Child. Have fun with that.
Jesus,
That'll
that's a good one.
fuck you up. That's complex PTSD. Healing the Shame That Binds You. That's another fun one. Go have fun with that. There's all kinds of resources, all kinds of communities. If you look at the beginning of the phone book, there's a 12-step group. They're towards the front. I think what the letter before B, that's helpful. There's some other ones too, in there. They tend to end with A. Can't say who they are because I don't know who they are. They're pretty sure they're anonymous, but that's helpful if you need it. And not the hacker organization, just to be clear. I don't know.
We might need those people right now.
Okay. Other resources. There's a guy on Instagram named Nate Postlethwaite who has been speaking a lot about his trauma and has developed quite a following, and his message is really powerful, which is just about allowing that child to feel what that child didn't feel. There's a lot of people that are talking about this. I think Brene Brown, in talking about her vulnerability, she's been in recovery for years. I think that's a big one. There's a guy named Gabor Mate. If anyone struggles with addiction stuff, his whole premise around addiction is huge because it's all about isolation versus connection. So it's really about connection. And I think, the one thing that I would say, Max said it, I just want to reiterate it, is it might feel really like, when I started to do this work and I started to feel better, feeling better felt worse, right? Like, the pain in my stomach started to go away. And I'd go, oh, well, what do I do? And then I'd reach back out to the thing that would cause the pain. And I'd be like, oh, that's familiar. And I'd be like, but that's more pain. Like, there's going to be pain. It's just, if it's going to be the pain that or the one you don't, right? But like, it can feel really uncomfortable to make healthy choices if you're used to unhealthy choices. It can feel really uncomfortable to just feel your feelings as opposed to creating dramas, if you're not able to just sit with your feelings and cry or feel sad, right? So just being really patient with yourself and gentle, and know that, like Max said, it's a process, and it's not, and your brain will probably tell you it's wrong. Because your brain's trying to protect something. So it'll be like, that's not like that, and so just be really gentle with yourself. Develop some sort of self-practice, like meditation, just sitting down and being aware that you're breathing. Like, literally, the breath is fucking life-changing, and it is life. Like, if you couldn't get another breath, that would be it. Regardless of any ideas, things you have, that would be it. So just really sitting with your breath. Most people breathe really shallowly into their chest. Breathing deeper, taking your time. I watched what happens when people just start to breathe. They'll start fucking crying because they're literally connecting to parts of their body they haven't connected with, right? So just being with the breath, walking outside, being in nature, having some sort of meditation. There's a meditation app called Insight Timer. It's all free. It's got amazing fucking teachers. Max mentioned, what's the other one that you went through? Headspace, right? Yeah, Headspace. There's all these things out there now to support. So yeah, but talk to someone. Don't do it on your own. Find somebody that you can talk to.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much.
Sweet.
I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdoms and I love your passion for this stuff. It's really inspiring, I think.
The Ignoramus' Guide to Surviving Humanity is available as a podcast on Spotify and Amazon Music.
You can also like and subscribe to our videos on YouTube. And if you want to help us grow, then you can become a patron on Patreon. And that's it, right? I think that's it.
Yeah.